Hi, my name is Joe Jackson. I'm a journalist, author, interviewer and broadcaster. And back in 2001 or so, not long after I did the interview with Sinead O Connor, which you're about to hear, in part, in this, the first of a series of podcasts, Sinead sent me an email asking if I would be interested in helping her to write her biography. However, that little exchange came to nothing, and frankly speaking, I'm glad it did, because I now see that Sinead is about to publish her own memoir, Rememberings, written by herself. And I've always felt that memoirs written firsthand ring more true than those written with co-authors. Either way, I also heard this week, the last week in May 2021 by the way, that Sinead has decided not to do any more interviews promoting her book. So, I'd like to try, in my own small way, to help her promote it by uploading these podcasts in which Sinead also remembered her past, arguably in a more graphic and telling detail than she had up until that point. Incidentally, I was born and raised in the same town as Sinead, Dunleary, around roughly the same time, and I'd followed her career carefully, albeit from afar. Also, apart from writing a profile of Sinead for the Irish Times in the early 1990s, and more recently interviewing her for my radio series Under the Influence, which was primarily about her music, we'd never previously talked in depth, although we had met socially on many occasions, mostly at rock gigs, hers or others. Not only that, the interview itself was being done as a cover story for the living section of the Irish newspaper The Sunday Independent, for which I'd only recently begun to do weekly interviews, and I was asked to do it by Deputy Editor Anne Harris. By the way, if you want to read the full article, it's available on my website joejacksoninterviewer.com, and if you want access to the original tapes for personal or professional use, contact me via my website joejacksoninterviewer.com.
I was just reading them again myself this morning. Just the context that it is the Sunday Indo and why that might be problematic for you even to kick off.
Why?
Like last week, you would have your problems with the paper. Last week, you were saying to me, how can I get myself out of the gossip columns, or how do you get...
I don't have my problems with...
Do you not?
No, or with any particular paper, no.
Alright, okay. Because I saw one of the things they were just saying, and I would find it offensive, that the quote of the relationships of the year was Ewan Dermot.
Right.
And it just said, it was a dig at, he accepts me for what I am. And the dig is that the priest, the celibate priest, the rock star, or the lesbian. And when you see your life reduced to three little lines like that, is that the very kind of thing that makes you go, I'm not going to discuss those things? Is that why you draw back from it?
No, I don't read the papers for a start,
Right.
really, unless there's something, politically that I'm interested in going on, in which case I tend to read the Telegraph. I don't really read any other newspapers. So,
Right.
And I'm been in the business long enough to know that that's part of the job. You've got to put up with shit like that, so it really doesn't bother me anymore, and I don't have problems with particular people, and I don't take them personally.
Right.
Because I've so many people in there are friends of mine. Do you know what I mean? Most of my friends
because you were writing for a time and then that suddenly stopped.
Well, yeah, but I'm not really a regular writer, so it's not so much stopped as such, but I'm not a regular writer for them,
Okay, so did you have a falling out or anything?
No, I wouldn't say so, no.
No.
We've had our, disagreements over the years, but I wouldn't say we fell out. In fact, far from it, very good friends as far as I feel it, with Anne Harris and Owen and Angus and Mary O'Sullivan, so.
Alright, okay, so there's no...
Like, we wouldn't necessarily socialise or anything, but we're good.
Right.
We respect each other, basically, you know what I mean? And I respect, look, most of my friends work for newspapers all over the place, you know what I mean? So I respect they have a certain job to do, and they have a particular mindset, and that's them, and this is me, and I don't, judge them for being the way they are.
But there was a time where you weren't quite as either tolerant, and you were very deeply hurt by violation of exercise of private life.
Yeah, but I guess I've grown out of that, you know what I mean? And I accept that, if I'm going to be open about things, then that opens it for anyone to comment about it, you know what I mean?
So none of the jibes get to you. I mean, we said this on the radio show when people say, well, we should shut up about religion. You say, I can't say anything against that. They're acting in knowledge.
Because people are entitled to their own opinion, and I understand the mindset of newspapers and what they have to do. Do you know what I mean? And how much their emphasis is on trying to make a living, that they need to make a living. And people like me help them to do that as much as they help people like me to do that. You know what I mean?
to sell records.
So, yeah, not by doing all the nasty stuff, you know what I mean? But I guess I just don't take it personally. Like, I might have said this to you before, but what I learned from growing up in a small town like Dublin is as well, like, you're stuck with everyone. We're all in the same boat, and you're going to bump into each other in Grafton Street or whatever, so you may as well not hold grudges. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And none of us are perfect, and I wouldn't be therefore in a position to judge anyone else because I'm not fucking perfect, you know what I mean? But anyway, I'm saying that I don't read newspapers, and I've grown older so that I don't really take personally.
And you also told me on the radio that your dad would say he wouldn't bother reading some of the stuff.
No.
So
No.
it doesn't get, unless you said if some things are printed that are patent lies, you then will still take hurt or offence.
That's stuff that used to go on years ago. Like, for me, that's experiences that I would have had maybe 10 years ago or up to 8 years ago. I was obviously very hurt by the coverage of what was going on concerning my daughter. You know, the suggestion that I had abused my child, and how radio shows were held discussing what kind of mother I would be, and people were phoning up saying they wouldn't let their kids near me. A child I used to babysit called up and was abused, you know, for saying that I was a good person, you know. So shit like that was hurtful. Well, a girl who I used to mind when she was a baby called up in my defence, saying how appalling it was that anyone should conduct a show like this, you know, based on tabloid rumours that, you know, that had gone around that I was being charged for child abuse, which is not true. You know?
Well, you see, there was an interview.
That was hurtful.
You
obviously.
did an interview with Anne House, which then wasn't allowed to be run.
Yeah.
Where you addressed that issue.
Yeah.
And it never did turn up. It couldn't turn up because there was an injunction put on the newspaper. But there was never anything said at the time that it was a charge. It was just a complaint lodged that the papers went crazy.
Yeah, but it wasn't just papers, but radio shows. Like, there were actually radio shows held, you know, on RTE channels. The discussion being, is Sinead O Connor a fit mother? That type of thing I found offensive, obviously, you know.
And did that kind of coverage and the kind of, even the Sunday Independent ran some stories before that, and I do remember the Savage piece by Mr. Duffy. You know, would they have damaged either your relationship with your daughter or your relationship at the time with John?
They never damaged my relationship with my daughter, obviously, but they certainly destroyed the relationship with John.
Do you think you believe that?
Yeah.
The high profile attacks?
Yeah.
And the way the paper, I think it was, delivered.
They were responsible for what then took place between myself and John in terms of fighting over Oisin, definitely.
They were responsible?
Yeah,
you really
definitely,
think so?
yeah.
Oh, you know. But why though? Because of, I think, was it the representation of the comment on the gay burn thing?
Yeah, because that's not what I had actually said. What I had actually said was it was a donor situation, meaning that both of us were, myself was the donor, not John at all, but that both of us were in a situation where we were friends and having a baby together without necessarily going out with each other.
And decided to.
And then what I said was it was, quote, a donor situation, unquote. But this, obviously, because a lot of people had grudges against John, you know, they all set out to make out that I had said that he was some kind of sperm donor. Which, of course, sadly he believed then, because so many people fucking said it to him.
That you said it about him?
Yeah, well, not that I said it about him, but that this is what I felt. And since he knew them better than he knew me as such, it resulted in years of misunderstanding, which caused great pain for John
so
and myself.
I remember that at the time, that the idea was that you targeted John Wallace specifically.
Yeah, but but that doesn't make it a sperm donor situation, you know what I mean? And nothing that I said implied at all that he was some kind of sperm donor who I didn't want involved with his child, or who wouldn't be allowed to be involved with his child, or bullshit, or wasn't entitled to be, you know what I mean? Like, so that put him in a terrible position, because it you know, it made any man's worst fears become reality, you know.
Yeah. And did everything fall apart? Are you even in touch anymore?
We're good friends now. We have a good respect for each other now, but that's having been through, you know.
The succeeding kind of.
Yeah. But I resent the custody case and the responsibility of the media in that, and how they are all prepared to jump on the chance that I might be a child abuser of some type, which was really a soul murder and an attack on everything that I stand for. You know.
Soul murder.
So, you know.
But where was the child abuser accusation levelled?
It was done. First of all, it was picked up on by the Mirror, who knew that charges had been, or not charges, but that a complaint had been made against me, a malicious complaint.
Right.
And before,
was I wrong?
It was emotional abuse and neglect. Yeah.
Okay.
And before I had even been investigated by social services or anything, someone had alerted the Daily Mirror the Sunday Mirror, who turned up on my doorstep, and this is how I found out about this.
Okay.
And they printed it, and everyone was prepared then to jump on it. And if anything in my career hurt me, or not in my career, but if anything media-wise hurt me, I would say it was that, because that was really an evil thing to do, you know. So.
But you said that was the last time you read something like that, the media turned you inside out.
Yeah.
And that affected your dad in that at the time too?
Well, yes and no. I mean, indirectly it would have, you know, after about a year of all this bullshit going on, my father, obviously, it got to the situation where my father had to really step in and help out, you know, with his legal knowledge and with his knowledge of me, and, you know, and his knowledge that what was being, you know, he's a barrister, yeah. He used to be a barrister. He doesn't act as a barrister now, but he used to be. But also his knowledge of me and his knowledge that the charges, or accusations rather, that were being made were completely untrue and unfair, and he saw that I was being murdered to a huge extent and stepped in. So, so yeah, I would say that the media in Ireland have a huge responsibility in that, in what happened. Other stuff doesn't really affect me, you know what I mean, and nothing did or will ever like that would have.
It is absolutely profound.
Yeah.
Sounds like baptism of fire.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was. Absolutely.
So the other stuff afterwards, the kind of snide remarks or anything about that, just kind of like...
Look, no, I live in Dublin. It's a bitchy town, bitchy people run newspapers, schoolyard gossips, schoolyard bitches. You know what I mean? But I don't take it personally, and I love those people who are friends of mine in there, even if, you know, they have some fucked up attitude toward me, which I can't say whether they do or they don't. You know what I mean? That doesn't stop me from loving them if I do love them, you know.
All right. So. And have you maintained good relationships with John Reynolds and John Waters? You know, just in terms of each other.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very much so.
The family thing is so important to you.
Yeah, very much so. Myself and John Reynolds are best friends in the world, and myself and John Waters are now, thank God, after the baptism of our coming to having a good respect for each other, you know, and even a liking for each other. So.
Even a liking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was always there, obviously. You know what I mean? But we both went through difficult times and hurt each other a lot, you know.
And were you never so romantic that you would say, I will only have a child with somebody I'm deeply in love with?
At that point in my life, the way I felt about myself was so low that I didn't believe anybody would ever want to be with me, that it wouldn't be possible for me to have a child like that in a relationship where I was married, because I felt I was so awful a person that nobody would ever want to live with me. And in saying that, I have no regrets, because I love John Waters very deeply, and I always have done, and I'm very so when I say I targeted him, it sounds colder than I meant it. I meant I saw him, I got to know him, I realised what an incredible human being he was, and that if I was going to have a child, I'd like to have a child with him. Right. You know what I mean? Whether we were together or not, you know what I mean? And I don't have any regrets, because the child is incredible, you know.
But why was your esteem so low at the time? I mean, was it the combination?
I was just very young and very depressed, and you know what I mean. I was suffering from very severe depression. I was very unhappy, very lonely. You know, the effects of being famous, the effects of being living away.
I'm reading this morning like this here.
Yeah, but that would have been yeah, absolutely. But that would have been a couple of years before. I mean, the whole fucking thing is a soul cry, man.
Yeah, I know.
I see some of the most like earlier ones are like prayers, and the others are like answers. It starts getting answers when it gets to Universal Mother, or when it gets to Gospel Oak. You start getting answers. You know.
But the original ones are what?
Prayers.
Cries.
Yeah, definitely.
But there are also cries of anger and cries of rage. There has been, like I've watched from afar.
Yeah, absolutely. Justifiable anger, and I would have had perfectly good reason to be as angry as I was, which is impossible for any of you, forgive me for using the word, to understand. But
as in us journalists or people outside?
Well, people in general, like where I come from and what I came from and what I was writing about, the extent of child abuse and what had gone on within my family, its effects on my family, and therefore its effects on many people to whom it's happening as we speak. My chosen mission in life was to do what I could to make sure that this would never happen again in any other Irish house, or any house in the world for that matter, and that people should know exactly what happened. And you know, that then later, as I got older, I would hopefully be able to use my experience to bring some compassion and be involved in the healing process for myself and other people regarding child abuse and all. But basically, of course, I was fucking angry. Yeah. Why wouldn't I have been? And I have no shame about that. You know what I mean? It's challenging for people, because up until that point, anyone dealing with child abuse had been in shadow. You know what I mean? And all acting like there was something to be ashamed of. You know what I mean? And I feel very much like I identify with NWA, and myself, I think we're very similar, although we're coming from different places. Everyone railed against NWA for being so angry, but of course they were fucking angry. This is what their life had been in. Yeah. So I was the physical embodiment of the effects of child abuse, and part of that is a huge rage and anger, justifiable rage and anger, you know. But it was very hard for people to understand, because people have prejudices about pop stars, especially the females, you know what I mean? that kind of we are not ordinary human beings, you know. So, yeah, I was angry.
But where is that anger now?
Well, you know, having expressed it through songs and having gone for years of therapy, and I wasn't only angry, you know what I mean?
I know.
But, you know, I mean,
there's a dominant feeling of anger from the original.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said it was dominant, but I would have said also it was great pain. I mean, if there was anger, it was anger which was quite clearly made out of great pain. And you're talking of someone of 20 years of age dealing with emotions which are fucking completely and utterly overwhelming, like that someone of 50 years of age would find hard to cope with, you know. So here I trying to be 20 years of age and deal with all of this shit, you know what I mean? But I felt that music, was a safe place to put anger and express anger. I never went around beating people up. I never went around jacking up or destroying myself, you know what I mean? What I did was write songs about it. But I wrote equally and probably more tender and fragile songs. And I think this is the other reason I was such an angry person, is because actually I'm a terribly tender person, and I always was. And I distinctly remember as a child deciding one day I was riding on the back of someone's bike to act really fucking tough, and this would get me through life if I cursed a lot and I acted really fucking tough, you know, that this would get me through life. So it became for me a protection of my tenderness, because I am very vulnerable. So to act real fucking tough and angry was basically how I got through life.
Were you also, is that just myth, given the guitar when you were in care?
Yeah, my first guitar I got given by Sister Margaret, who ran the on Grianon, it was called, the House of the Rising Sun. I used to blare that, sing it really fucking loud in their faces. They were all like really nice and everything, but
Was this then? This was 13, was it?
14, just gone 14, I think, or going on 14.
Alright, when you were in care?
Yeah.
Who put you in care? Was it your dad?
My father, yeah, on the recommendation of a really lousy social worker.
Okay, your mum was dead then?
No, I had left, I had run away from my mother when I was 13.
Okay.
But I had been brought up by my mother to steal and various other things, so I got into a lot of trouble stealing. I was obviously extremely disturbed, having had the shit kicked out of me in more ways than one every day of my life, and you know, blah blah. So I couldn't really adjust to what was supposedly normal life in my father's house, and I didn't go to school, and I was robbing money off my dad, and generally my father was worried, I think, that I was going to end up, as he put it, on the wrong side of the tracks, or end up like my mother, you know, criminal.
You say she didn't bring you up to steal?
Oh yeah, she did, yeah.
She taught you how to steal?
Yeah, I encouraged it. That was how we avoided being beaten.
Yeah. To get stuff for the house?
Yeah, not just for the house, but like we had a whole scam going where she would drive us into town. This started when I was about 11. She would drive us into town. We'd get Flag Day collection boxes and give our false names and addresses, and she would drive us around pubs at night, and we would collect money, and then she would empty it out and take all the money.
Did you get a cut or anything?
We got the coppers, and she got the silver, and we were all working in restaurants and everything, and you know, like we were basically encouraged to steal things, and you know, she'd send you to lost property at school to nick a pair of shoes, and then when we got caught, she'd say she knew nothing about it, this kind of thing. And so the police finally caught us. This is why I ran away. The police caught us when I was 13 down in the club pub in Dalkey, because I drew a big fucking face on the toilet door. Yeah.
I know.
I drew a big face on the toilet door, and we were foolish enough to go back the next week, me and my sister, and the boss got us, and we climbed out the fucking window and ran away. But basically we got arrested, but thank God it was a policeman, Sergeant Mannion, who had been in our house a few times, because the neighbours would call the police because they'd hear us screaming, you know. So he knew my mother, and he knew she was a nutter, so luckily he didn't arrest us. But when she came to the station, she said she knew nothing about it, which really I was devastated by, you know. So, you know, a few months later, basically, I fucked off. So then I spent about 8 months at my dad's, getting into trouble and not settling down, and my stepmother was concerned about me, so she called a social worker who very stupidly, in my opinion, advised that they send me off to this place.
This wasn't the place that I won't use this in Macklin.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I think you should use it, yeah.
Oh, no, because I thought you were just... See, Chanel, I haven't looked at this idea.
I think you should use it.
No, I will, but if you want, I'll only use what you want me to. But I didn't. This is all new to me.
Yeah.
Because I've listened to your music, but I suppose I didn't read as much on the life, because I thought so much of it was sensationalised by my own peers.
Right.
I was probably waiting until I could talk to you like this.
Well, that's again because of the prejudice towards women who do what I do for a living, that we are obviously making everything up, and we're all publicity seeking, and anything we say, blah blah blah. But you know, that's just not the case at all. Like, and I wouldn't have been doing any of this shit if not for the reality of where I came from, which none of you, and I'm sorry to sound so offensive, could possibly begin to fucking imagine. And if you all did know, you would all cry your hearts out and thank me very much for fucking trying to do what I could do to voice this and give a voice to those of us who have almost been murdered in our own homes, you know.
But when you say neighbours would call the cops because they'd hear you screaming, and they accepted your word that she was a nutter. Is that the absolute reality?
Oh, yeah.
Because Joe has said it's not.
Well, if you look carefully at what Joe has said, Joe himself is quoted in one interview as saying that the type of violence my mother committed upon us was the type that if you did it to an adult, you'd be locked up.
Okay, all right.
So Joe contradicts himself, and also I think is trying to protect himself. And also Joe wasn't beaten. Joe, a lot of the violence that took place with us took place when Joe was out of the house, although he hauled my mother off us enough times to know the truth. Basically, he's not telling the truth for reasons of protecting himself, and also, you know, for reasons, I think, of him having such a problem with me. It's not been easy for him that I needed to be so open. You know what I mean? That he has his way of dealing with his recovery, and I have my way of dealing with mine. So, but I never spoke about his experience or anyone else's experience, just my own experience. So.
Do you get on now?
Yeah. I mean, we're not close at all, you know what I mean? But
why though? Because of that? Because you went public on those things?
Not only because of that, but because we both have our own pain to deal with, you know what I mean? And you know, while Joseph wasn't violently abused by my mother, he was abused in other ways sufficient to be very, very hurt himself. So, you know.
What happened to drag your mother off leaving your sister?
Well, and she had her own ways of destroying him as well, you know what I mean? In a lot of ways, he suffered more than us, although yeah, exactly, she had different ways of abusing each of the four of us. So
well, was it fundamentally breaking down self-esteem, as you read about there, breaking down confidence, breaking down identity, breing down things that should be
absolutely
of core importance to us?
Absolutely.
That kind of psychological destruction.
Well, you know, one of the things that my mother used to do, she had different things with each of us, but one of the things she used to do, particularly to myself, and I won't talk about my brothers and sisters' experience because it wouldn't be fair on them, on a regular basis, except for one thing I will, but on a regular basis, you know, and I've probably said this before, I would be made to take off my clothes and lie on the floor while she kicked me around and would kick me here and spit at it and blah blah. But one of the things that she used to do is she would make me say I'm nothing. I would have to say things like I'm nothing and ask her for mercy, things like this. So that breaks down your self-esteem. And if you're lying on the floor and your mother's telling you to say you're nothing, do you know what I mean? This kind of shit. Myself and my younger brother lived in the garden for 2 summers in a row, and were fed on the doorstep, literally, lived in the garden shed, this type of thing. Because she had students in the house, and you got money for students, but you could only have them if you had 2 kids. So she put us in the garden and told the students we were her nephew and niece, and that we were staying there in the daytimes. This kind of shit was going on, you know. So there's a lot of sadism. The violence was sexually abusive, you know.
When your mother spits at your genital area, how do you assert your sexuality in the face of that?
Well, exactly, and how do you feel comfortable being a girl? You know, for me, I think I was very in my male for the first few years, and of course I was very fucking angry, you know what I mean? And my intention was not to let my mother destroy my sexuality or my spirit, which is often your sexuality. But I had great difficulty being a girl or being female or being tender, or you know what I mean?
But you did say that even you allowed yourself, or you naturally felt lustful feelings from the age of 8. And when you were quite young, you asserted yourself sexually with all the people in your teens.
Yeah.
So you were able to say, this is my space.
Yeah, but I wasn't necessarily able to conduct a fully rounded relationship. Like you could go and fuck people or whatever, but you couldn't necessarily conduct a loving relationship. Like for years I had a huge problem with making love with someone I loved, because I thought that's not something you do with people you love. That's something that people who are horrible do to you. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't put love and sex together. No, for a very long time. So.
For how long?
God, I mean, you know, till I was like 34, really. Well, 33, you know.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But that kind of, have you since come to any kind of, what is your understanding of your mother's own distress or pain?
I've always had massive compassion for my mother, which is again a problem often between myself, I think, and Joe, or myself, you know, in that relationship, is that I love my mother, and there's a lot of hatred within the family for my mother, but I've always adored my mother. I'm in love with my mother, as any daughter would be. That doesn't mean I'm not terribly hurt by her, or that I haven't in the past been terribly hurt, but I've always, since I was a kid, had compassion for her, you know. I believe what she suffered from was that thing Munchausen's by proxy, you know, where in a way she was trying to get attention for herself by hurting us, you know. She out of her mind crazy. She didn't know what the fuck she was doing, basically, and I always felt that. And being a religious child as well, I've had the thing of separating the sin from the sinner, you know. So, you know, that doesn't mean, again, that I didn't have massive anger towards her because I felt so hurt and let down and everything, you know, and the loss and blah, blah. But
isn't part of the dilemma what you're saying? I mean, my dad was very abusive, but I've never stopped loving him.
yeah.
And people always said, why don't you hate me?
Yeah.
And it actually has to do with me when I read John Lennon, the primal therapy stuff. Somebody mocked him in Melody Maker, and John wrote in a letter which just said, you must have been in a lot of pain when you wrote that letter. And I just went, wow, he's not telling him to fuck off and that he's a fool. So I remember with my dad, whenever it was going on, I'd say, what, this man didn't bring me into the world to do this. You know, and you would look at your mother and go, when I was conceived, the plan was never for this to happen. So the big question has to be, what the fuck went wrong?
Well, and the other thing, in terms of anyone thinking that none of this is true, you know, me and my brothers and sister were given to my father for custody when I was 8.5, and the judgment is there for anyone to read in Alan Shatter's family law book, where it states basically that my mother was so violent that they were giving us to our father, etc., and that exactly what my mother was up to. So if anyone thinks it's not true, or anyone is tending to believe those who say it's an exaggeration, well, you know, the documents are there to prove that wrong.
And you know, when those stories came out suggesting that you were abusive, isn't that part of the prejudice towards someone who's abused?
Yeah, well, that was John's case against me. That was the only case against me. Was exactly it came from the judgment of Alan the judgment that the judge made was that the kind of abuse that had been undergone by the girls in particular would leave them severely emotionally disturbed as they got older, which of course it did. And would, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be a good enough mother. But yeah, a lot of people believe that those who are abused don't make good parents, and that was the only case against me, which was actually even more appalling.
But it all fell apart, didn't it?
Yeah, in the end, but it took 14 months for them to get around to it falling apart, and there was a lot of prejudice because a lot of people were delighted to have Sinead O'Connor in a box and have me crying my eyes out and humiliated and fucking phobic, which I was. I was hysterical throughout the whole thing.
And how did it end? What was the judgment? That there was no ground for this accusation?
That there was no ground for it whatsoever, and that the child should be with the mother if the parents couldn't come to an agreement as to how things should be worked out.
That was the decision.
So yeah.
And how do you deal with your own, if you have a tendency towards violence?
I don't have
music into music?
I have no tendency towards violence, no.
Do you not allow yourself to rage?
I have done, yeah, and I've anger and I have a temper, but it's not physically violent, my temper, and it doesn't come out on my children. I never lose my temper with my children. The only people I've ever lost my temper with are blokes, you know. And saying that, you know, that wouldn't be all the time, but yeah, I have a temper, definitely.
Would you want to go?
So, no.
Why would you stop? Can you control it, stop it at the last moment?
Yeah, it doesn't occur to me, you know.
To go that far?
No. I use words, you know. I'm verbal, you know.
Sharply, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, I have a terrible temper, you know, in truth I have an awful temper, but it's verbal and vocal, it's not, you know, physical. And equally I'm reasonable and rational and sorry 2 minutes later, and I don't hold on to things, you know what I mean?
Would you not tend not to go write a song about it?
No.
No?
No, not really. I don't really want to write angry songs anymore.
Do you not? No, because that's the way the thing has turned in your career over the
Well, I had to, because I was dealing with stuff which wasn't allowed to be expressed in any other way. I grew up in a family where all of this fucking hell and nightmare was going on, but everyone was acting like nothing had happened. No one was talking about it. I grew in a country where you couldn't talk about it. So I had to fucking write songs about it. And at that point I was too young. I didn't get into therapy till I was 28, you know what I mean? And also I was so angry I didn't even know I was angry. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that.
Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. And don't forget, if you want to access the full tapes of the interview you just heard for personal or professional use, or read the article that I wrote based on that chat, you can contact me via my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.